Mic check one. get started. Good afternoon. The Committee on Rules is now called to order at 2:04 this afternoon. I'd like to ask the Committee on Rules Director to please take roll.
Senator St. Nicholas.
Present.
Senator St. Nicholas, present. Senator Nelson.
Present.
Senator Nelson, present. Speaker Cruz.
Present.
Speaker Cruz, present. Vice Speaker Terlahi. Vice Speaker Terlahi, present. Senator Bisco-Lee.
Gagia.
Senator Bisco-Lee, present. Senator Atta.
Present.
Senator Atta, present. Senator San Augustine. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, present. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, absent. Senator Espaldon. Senator Espaldon, present. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, present. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Could we have a motion to ratify our minutes of March 1st? Motion by the Speaker, second by Legislative Secretary Regine Lee. On to our core business, document tracking prepared by our Legislative Secretary Regine Lee. Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Buenas and half a day, Todos Samzu. Legislative Secretary report today is as follows. 31 appointments submitted by the Governor and all are pending. 2 zone changes submitted by the Governor and both have been approved by the Governor's office. 5 proposed rules and regulations submitted thus far. The first one is governing telepharmacy practice across Guam and state lines pursuant to the Administrative Adjudication Law submitted by the Guam Board of Examiners for Pharmacy, with a potential due date to lapse into law on May 20th, 2017, should the Committee on Health, Tourism, Military Affairs, and Senior Citizens not take action. The other 4 are transmittals from the Board of Trustees of the Government of Guam Retirement Fund, proposed plan document for the benefit or the defined benefit 1.75 retirement system, retirement security plan, defined contribution retirement system, and the deferred compensation plan, all pursuant to Public Law 33-186. Situs Masi.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. For the items that are available for session agenda, the Committee on Rules has duly filed the following items. Bills cleared for session agenda consideration is Bill number 1-34 as corrected by its prime sponsor and amended by the committee. Bill number 2-34 as corrected by the prime sponsor. Bill number 10-34, Bill number 14-34, Bill number 15-34 as corrected by the prime sponsor. Bill number 16-34 as amended by the committee. Bill number 17-34, Bill number 23-34, Bill number 29-34 as amended by the committee, and Bill number 38-34. Also available for placement on session agenda is Substantive Resolution number 25-34, Resolution number 39-34, Resolution number 40-34, and Resolution number 62-34. We also have available for placement on session agenda a dozen appointments. The appointment of Amanda Blas to serve as General Public Member, Guam Academy Charter Schools. The appointment of Joseph Sorteza to serve as Member, Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency. The appointment of Robert A. Crisostomo to serve as Elected Member, Guam Education Board. The appointment of Christopher Duenas to serve as President, Guam Housing Corporation. The appointment of Joseph Franquez to serve as Classroom Teacher Member, KGTF PBS Board of Trustees. The appointment of Vinakshi Hamlani to serve as Member, Guam Solid Waste Authority Board of Directors. The appointment of Cecilia G. Mantanotnia to serve as Member, Guam Housing Board of Directors. The appointment of George Pareda to serve as Member, Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority Board of Commissioners. The appointment of Pelagio S. Sardoma to serve as Member, Guam Board of Equalization. The appointment of Krishnan Siringan to serve as Member, Guam Public Library System Board of Directors. The appointment of Nathan Taimanglo to serve as Member, Guam Port Authority Board of Directors. The appointment of Ray Sitahaji to serve as Physician Assistant Representative, Guam Board of Allied Health Examiners. The Committee on Rules will now entertain motions for placement on session agenda for any bills that have cleared the Committee on Rules process. Is there any motions for any bills? Secretary Regine Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move that Bills 1-34 and 2-34 COR, as corrected by the prime sponsor and amended by the committee, be moved to the consent calendar. Both of these bills were moved out of their committee with votes to pass the bill with no report out votes nor any nay votes. These bills will likely not be opposed, so I move that they be placed on the consent calendar for this session so that consideration on the floor may be streamlined. If my motion is seconded and core members here by a vote of 8 approve, I look forward to Bills 1 and 2 being discussed on the floor before passage pursuant to the standing rules.
So just to clarify, we'll address each motion separately because we don't know what the reaction might be to any individual bill.
Sure.
So the motion is to place Bill number 1-34 on the session agenda. On the motion to place Bill 1-34 on the session agenda,
Sorry, no, on the consent calendar. And Senator Huggins seconds.
typically in the Committee on Rules, we place items on the session agenda.
You can do it in Committee on Rules, and you can also do it on the floor, based on our standing rules.
Right. The speaker is inquiring as to the rationale for placement on consent calendar.
So these were the only 2 bills that are moved out of the committee with votes to pass the bill. All voted to pass. No report out votes, no nay votes. So this is just an attempt to streamline the process and put it on the consent calendar.
The issue with that is that in the committee process, oftentimes the membership traditionally votes yes on the committee report, but that doesn't necessarily indicate that they will vote yes on the measure on the floor.
Understood.
And so the reason why, even if there are yes votes on the session agenda, on the committee report voting sheet, we still prefer to put them on the actual legislative agenda because members of the course of debate may change their vote and not necessarily vote yes.
Mr. Chair, putting it on the consent calendar does not, it still allows for discussion on the floor for both of the bills and discussion on the floor before passage pursuant to the standing rules. So I'm not sure what your concern would be. Still have an opportunity to discuss it, and there's still an opportunity to have it move along.
Just the curiosity then is in the traditional course of things, we just place them on the session agenda. So why the need to place them on the consent calendar? What is the streamlining that you're attempting to accomplish if there is still going to be discussion on the measure?
So we just have it be streamlined and help it to move forward more quickly and allow an opportunity for other bills that will likely take an additional amount of time and more discussion to have their additional time. I'm not sure. I'm not following your inquiry.
Well, no, normally we just place items on the session agenda, but you're looking to place an item on the consent calendar.
Yes, so that
And if they're both going to be requiring discussion, what's the streamlining that you're looking to accomplish with the placement on the consent calendar?
It's my desire that these 2 be moved to the consent calendar just because they weren't, no votes no report out votes or any nay votes were given. And so I would just like to move forward so that we can not have to, in streamlining it, we still have an opportunity to discuss it on the floor, is my understanding of the standing rules, and we still have an opportunity to vote on it. So placing on the consent calendar and having it go through the additional process, it just helps the bills to move along a little bit faster, is my understanding.
The thing is normally on the consent calendar we will put like resolutions that were just commendatory or congratulatory, and those we never actually, I've never recalled, and I guess the speaker can chime in at any time, but I've never recalled in the session a request of the body if there's anybody who wishes to discuss consent calendar items. Placing bills in the consent calendar would basically be treating them like commendatory or congratulatory resolutions, and that's a practice that I'm not very comfortable with, only because typically when we place them on the agenda, they go on the second reading file, and that opens them up for an opportunity for discussion. And over the course of discussion, we also find if there's any items that need to be amended or changed, or if more questions need to be asked or answered by the author.
It's also my understanding that should they be placed on the consent calendar, it would only require a vote of 2 to have them removed from the consent calendar. Just because it's not something that we haven't done in the past doesn't mean that it shouldn't be something that we could consider going forward.
No, I understand.
So,
But consent calendar items, the reason why we have the consent calendar is because those are typically formalities. Commendatory and congratulatory resolutions are, for example, happy retirement. But a bill is actually, we're creating law.
Understood.
And so if we're going to be placing that on the consent calendar, we're basically going to require an extra process for that to be pulled out of the consent calendar and actually put up for discussion like a regular bill should. And what you're implying is that because there were all votes to pass on the
Out of
voting
committee.
sheet out of committee,
Right.
that we should just not put it on the second reading file and not have it moved to third and not have it available for discussion, unless somebody wants to pull it out with a motion on the consent calendar. I'm just uncomfortable with the lawmaking process involving automatically.
that's not my understanding, but did you have?
No, two questions. Does the sponsor want it on the consent calendar, or does the sponsor want it on the floor?
I haven't had a conversation with the sponsor.
Does the sponsor understand that if 2 people object, that it's dead and it goes back?
It just moves to the second reading file then.
But does she understand that that happens if somebody says, well, I'd like to make this amendment in here? Does she just... So I'm just...
I'm not sure. I haven't had a discussion with her.
Okay, no, my only question was whether or not whether the sponsor had cleared this process and wanted to go through this process, or whether or not the sponsor wanted to make the presentation to the body. And we've seen bills go to third reading without anybody saying anything, without doing the consent calendar. My fear is that I just don't want anything to have to take a 2 vote to take it out so that it goes back into the regular calendar.
I see.
But I'm willing to try it. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would object to the motion. I think that the process of having the floor read on the second reading file with open discussion, opportunities for people to express either their support or perhaps some suggested amendments that would improve the bill are in order. And being that this was a vote by the committee but not by the entire body, I would recommend that we just go through. And I think it would be a good exercise for the author, being that this is her first set of bills in her first term. I would think personally that would be appropriate for the process. It also as an introductory, but just in the course of introducing and debating and passing legislation. So I would object to that motion.
Objection noted. Is there any further discussion on the motion to place them on the consent calendar? And just to be clear, there is no objection on the bill's placement on the agenda at this time. It's just the process of placing it on the consent calendar. Is there any further discussion on the
Mr. Chair, if I may, could you just kind of differentiate, because there are a lot of people probably watching this proceeding, to perhaps briefly discuss the difference between placing it on a consent calendar versus placing it on a session agenda?
So by placing the measure on the consent calendar, by virtue of the body adopting the consent calendar, we will have adopted whatever was on that, including the bills if the bills are placed on that. Typically, the consent calendar is used for those measures that are very, there's not necessarily an issue with them, or there may not, even if there was, it wouldn't have any real impact on the territory, because they would be, congratulating someone, recognizing them for retiring, recognizing them for something that they've done. Those are usually resolutions. To put legislation on the consent calendar means that we are going to by virtue of adopting what's on that calendar, we're adopting those laws unless somebody were to, as was mentioned by the speaker, object, and then that would require the two members, in order for that to get pulled out of the consent calendar and placed onto the second reading file for the traditional process of discussing the bills. I just spoke with the Committee on Rules Director. The bill number 1 and 2 only had 6 votes on the committee report, but it typically requires 8 votes to pass a measure. And so what this motion is doing is it's saying that we have 6 votes, no one said no, so we're just going to put it on the consent calendar, and unless anybody objects, it's going to become law. But we will typically bypass the discussion unless somebody were to object and put it back onto the second reading file. And just for benefit of, again, the public, the consent calendar items have not, in my whole time being here, have never actually been put up for discussion. And as a matter of fact, in the process of us in session adopting the consent calendar, we typically just run through the numbers, resolution 1 to resolution 30. We don't even read off what the items are. And that's because in our standing rules, they very specifically create a separate process for resolutions that are substantive and resolutions that are not substantive. And so those items that are not substantive all go into the consent calendar, and they're kind of just automatically adopted by the body. But what this motion will be doing is it will be taking a bill, something that's creating law, and putting it through that same process that we typically reserve for those non-substantive items. And so that's why there's a lot of discussion and an objection. So is there any further discussion on the motion? Senator Akin. Vice Speaker.
Thank you. I would just like to add that I believe the motion is in order, whether we've done it or not. It's still relevant motion. I think what it's going to do is cut the debate from 15 minutes each to 5 minutes each, but there's still opportunity for debate, and the speaker's correct that if 2 or more object to it being on the consent calendar on that day, it's going to be put on second reading. So I believe the motion's in order, and I believe we should just vote on this motion. Thank you.
And the motion was never ruled out of order, but there has been an objection and there's been some discussion. I think it's good discussion because this is actually a new process that the body would be employing, and it would be a mechanism by which we would be adopting laws by consent rather than by putting them through the typical process of discussion and motions to third reading, etc. And the reason why I think it's important to also discuss it is the voting habits of committee members did not factor in this motion. So I think it's just something important for us to talk about. Is there any further discussion on the motion? If none, there's been an objection. All those in favor of placing bill number 1-34 on the consent calendar of the agenda, please indicate by raising your hand. No second on the motion. There's a second by Senator Akin. So on the motion as objected, all those in favor of placing bill number 1-34 on the consent calendar of the session agenda, please indicate by raising your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion fails. We only have 5 votes. Madam Secretary, we also have a similar motion for Bill 2. Okay, motion is withdrawn. Okay, so the motion to place Bill 2 is withdrawn, but you still have the floor.
I'd like to move that to place both bills 1 and 2 on the session agenda.
We'll go ahead and entertain each individually. On the motion to place bill number 1 on the session agenda, and it would be available for placement on the second reading file. All those in favor of placing bill 1 on the session agenda, please indicate by raising your hands. Motion carries. Is there a second for that motion? I'm sorry. Second by Speaker Cruz. On the motion to place bill 2 on the session agenda, is there a second? Second by the Speaker. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any other motions to place any other bills on the session agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I move to place Bill 10-34, an act relative to prohibiting the withdrawal or transfer of cash funds from the Guam Cancer Trust Fund for any non-prescribed purposes, and to make such act a misdemeanor on the agenda.
On the motion, is there a second? Second by Legislative Secretary Lee. All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, please say nay. Motion carries. Any further motions to place any bills on the agenda? Madam Vice Speaker, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move to put Bill 14-34 on the session agenda. It is an act relative to allowing the periodic audit of each agency's standard operating procedures and requiring such procedures to be posted on each agency's website. It's sponsored by Senator Esteves and myself, and thank you.
On the motion, is there a second? Espadon. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. Motion carries. Any further motions to place items on the session agenda? Mr. Speaker.
If I could also move to place Bill 15-34 as corrected by the Prime Sponsor, an act to require that a comprehensive cost-benefit and space utilization study be conducted by the government prior to the authorization, funding, or construction of the Unified Government Office facility.
On the motion, is there a second? Senator Torres. Any discussion? Vice Speaker.
Yes, can I just ask, the correction by the sponsor, was that before the public hearing, or what was it? I don't recall what that correction is. Do you recall?
I'm sorry, there were some corrections that I made.
Usually when they're corrected by the Prime Sponsor, it was because they were sent back to the Prime Sponsor by the COR prior to referral to committee. So usually the corrections they must happen prior to a public hearing. After public hearing, it would be amended by the committee. So corrected by the Prime Sponsor, that corrected version did have a public hearing. Any further questions or discussion on the motion to place Bill 15-34 on the session agenda? If no discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any further motions to place any bills on the session agenda? Senator Espadon? All right. Any further motions to place any bills on the session agenda?
I'd like to move to place 23-34 on the session agenda.
Motion to place Bill 23-34 on the session agenda. Is there a second? Second by Senator Lee. Secretary Lee. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any further motions to place any bills on the session agenda? We have Bill 16, Bill 17, Bill 29, and Bill 38. If none, sure. So for the record, we have placed on the session agenda Bill 1, Bill 2, Bill 10, Bill 14, Bill 15, and Bill 23. Any further motions for any bills?
Yes.
Madam
I'd like to
Secretary.
make a motion to place Bill 16-34 as amended, an act to add a new chapter to Division 2 of 22 GCA. This is relative to mandating the provision of healthcare insurance coverage for autism spectrum disorders by insurers. This act shall be known and cited as Hunter's Law of 2017.
On the motion, is there a second? Question by Senator Adam.
Yeah. So the motion is being made to place the bill. Normally, I think what happens in practice is if a member is not going to be here and would like to have a certain bill placed on the agenda, he would have asked someone to do so. If that's not the case, then maybe the sponsor of the bill is not ready to move on that bill. So to presume otherwise may be somewhat presumptuous.
said 16.
Oh, so he had asked, no, did he ask you to put it on the agenda? Okay, so then that's what I was asking.
Thank you, Senator Adams.
Okay, so the motion by Senator Lee to place Bill 16 on the agenda, is there a second? Second by Senator San Augustine. All in favor, please say aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Any further motions to place any items on the session agenda?
17?
Moved by Senator San Augustine to place Bill 17 on the session agenda. Is there a second? Second by Secretary Lee. All in favor, please say aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Any further motions? We do have still outstanding Bill number 29 and Bill 38. If none, we'll go ahead and retire the bills for consideration for session agenda. And again, for the record, we have on the agenda Bill 1, Bill 2, Bill 10, Bill 14, Bill 15, Bill 16, Bill 17, and Bill 23. We are now on the resolution items that are available for placement on session agenda. Is there any motions to place any resolutions on session agenda? Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to put resolution number 25 on the agenda. This is relative to the Guam's support of a bill in Congress regarding Agent Orange.
On the motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Senator Duggan. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Motion carries. Any further motions to place any resolutions on the session agenda?
Yes,
Senator Duggan.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Vice Speaker, you have the floor.
Yes. I would like to move that we put resolution number 39 on the session agenda. This is a resolution in support of congressional measures regarding the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act.
Second by Speaker Cruz. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any further motions? Madam Speaker,
Yes.
Vice Speaker, you
One
have the
more.
floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Resolution number 40, I would move that that be placed on the session agenda. It is relative to the veterans who were exposed to radiation during cleanup at the Inuit atolls.
Second by Speaker Cruz. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
We still have on the available for placement Resolution 62. Senator Uggan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move for the placement of resolution number 62-34 COR relative to authorizing the Legislative Council or other retained counsel to apply for and file an amicus curiae brief before the Supreme Courts of Guam, affirming the Guam Legislature's position relative to sovereign immunity and the upholding of Guam law.
On the motion, is there a second? Second by Senator Nelson. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That would exhaust all the items that we have available for placement on the session agenda for resolutions. For the record, resolutions 25, 39, 40, and 62 are placed on our session agenda. We now have our nominations that have been cleared for session agenda consideration. Are there any motions for any of these appointments? Vice Speaker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the appointment of Joseph D. Certeza for a member of CAHA and the appointment of Joseph D. Franquez as a member of KGTF PBS be put on the session agenda.
We'll entertain each separately. On the motion to place Mr. Certeza, is there a second? Second by Vice Speaker Cruz. No discussion. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. On the motion to place Mr. Franquez on the session agenda, is there a second? Second by Vice Speaker Cruz. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any further motions to place appointments on the agenda?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to place Christopher M. Duenas to serve as President for Guam Housing Corporation.
On the motion, is there a second? Second by Senator Espadon. Any discussion? If no discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any further appointments?
Yes, I have another. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to appoint Meenakshi V. Hamlani as a member of the Guam Solid Waste Authority Board. I'll just go down and read the names,
Sure.
and then we can do appointment of Cecilia G. Mantanonia to serve as a member of the Guam Housing Board of Directors. Mr. George F. Pareda to serve as a member of Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority Board of Commissioners.
Okay, we'll entertain each individually on the motion for Ms. Hamlani by Senator Nelson, second by Secretary Lee. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Motion carries. On the appointment of Cecilia Mantanotnia by Senator Nelson, is there a second?
Second for Cecilia.
Second by Speaker Cruz. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And on the motion for Mr. Pareda by Senator Nelson, is there a second? Second by Senator Espadon. Any discussion? If no discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Any further appointments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator San Agustin.
appointment of Amanda F. Blas to the Guam Academy Charter School Council.
On the motion, is there a second? Second by Senator Espadon. Any discussion? If no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries.
On the appointment of Robert A. Crisosimo to the Guam Education Board.
Second by Speaker Cruz. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
And the appointment of Pelagio Sardoma, Guam Board of Equalization.
On the motion, is there a second? Second by Senator Espadon. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
The appointment of Krishnan Serengan to the Guam Public Library System Board of Directors.
On the motion, is there a second? Second by Senator Espadon. Any discussion? If no discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposition? Motion carries. We do have two additional appointments, one for Mr. Taimangalo and one for Mr. Tahaji. Are there any motions to place these appointments on the session agenda?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
I'd like
Uggan.
to go ahead and move for the appointment of Ray C. Tahaji to serve as physician assistant representative, Guam Board of Allied Health Examiners.
On the motion, is there a second? Senator Nelson. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion carried. Lastly, Mr. Taimangalo. Senator Uggan.
Appointment of Mr. Nathan Taimangalo to serve as member of the Guam Port Authority Board of Directors.
Second by Secretary Lee. On the motion, is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposition? Motion carries. That would exhaust the Senator Uggan.
Just for the information of the members of the body and the legislature, I just received or conducted a confirmation hearing on the appointment of Ms. Rosalinda Tolan yesterday. Because of the nature of the preparation of the report, it should be filed by the close of business today. So I'm not going to move for it at this moment, but during the course of the session, I would like to request the consideration of the body to place it on the agenda after we dispose of all the other activities. Okay? Thank you very much.
If we are in session, that would be at the pleasure of the Speaker. So the COR would yield to the Speaker. Any further? Yes. Yes. Mr. Franquez is on the. Yes, Mr. Tahaji is on the agenda. That would exhaust the items that we have for availability. Are there any extension of remarks? If none, motion to adjourn. Moved by the Speaker, second by Senator Nelson. Thank you all very much.